Hello, everyone. My name is Deidre Kutsumpos, and on behalf of the Riverside Community Health Foundation, we would like to welcome you to the opening keynote, Living with Meaning, Finding Purpose and Joy in Everyday Life. This year's virtual Socal this year's SoCal Women's Virtual Cancer Conference. We will be selecting questions and okay. We're getting ready to watch a little quick video, so stay tuned as we begin our concert. Stay tuned as we begin our cancer conference. Thank you so much for joining us. Hello, everyone, and my name is Deidre Kutsumpos, and on behalf of the Riverside Community Health Foundation, we would like to welcome you to the opening keynote, Living with Meaning, Finding Purpose and Joy in Everyday Life at this year's virtual SoCal's Women's Cancer Conference. We will be selecting questions and answers during our Q&A portion of this talk, so please send us yours via the chat feature throughout the presentation. Also, if you like this talk, click the thumbs up button or drop us a comment and let us know. We love hearing from you. And if you need support accessing any of the talks on our virtual conference page, please email us at terry@rchf.org. That's Terry, Terri, at rchf.org. It is now my deepest pleasure to introduce you to Chief Clinical Officer, Director of Programs, and Research Licensed Clinical Psychologist at the Cancer Support Community, Shannon LaCava. Welcome, Shannon. We're so happy to have you with us.
Hi, thank you so much, Deidre. And I want to say thank you to Abigail Lopez, who got me connected with this organization and the talk today, as well as a shout out to Melissa and Sarah for all of your help with all the IT and fun, I guess, back of the house initiatives to get this going. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see my slides. And Deidre, are you able to see these okay?
I sure can. I see them.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll go ahead and get started. So first off, just to let you know, I don't have any financial disclosures. And our talk today will try to be interactive if we can. And it's really to just discuss meaning and what that means to find purpose and joy in our lives. And we'll start from there. So this is just a very rough kind of a table of contents for our talk today. So we really want to discuss values and joy and happiness. And we're really going to get to that point of how do we identify purpose and how do we find meaning in our lives? Okay, so this is where the interactive piece comes in. We're going to start off with it. So we have here a list of different potential values, but different items that can be in someone's life that you can identify of what feels valuable to you. So for those of you that are attending today, look through this list, and I will tell you right off the bat that this is truncated from a very large list that I used in some more in-person talks before. But look at this and see what resonates with you. And you're welcome, if you have a chat or a Q&A area, type in what kind of resonates with you right now. And they're going to share this with me, and I'd love to start reading some of these if we're able to kind of get the technology to be our friend on this. But look at this, and even if you don't put it into your chat, connect with something here or find something that's not on this list that really means something to you. Is it family? Is it joy? Is it health? Is it, determination? So what resonates with you? And as you kind of connect with that, maybe you'll recognize that that's what you are connecting to right now in this moment. And maybe that's not the same that really resonated yesterday or for tomorrow, because there's some fluidity here in what we value. There's some that can be a foundation to our lives and how we make decisions upon, but sometimes there's some difference, right? Our mood can change. So maybe positivity is not our guiding factor today. Maybe it's something that's more balanced, or that there can be some shifting and some changing. So I don't know if anyone's able to type in, but I'm going to just trust that you're looking through this list and you're maybe getting something that you're feeling connected with. And if nothing else, kind of understanding that there's items in your life that you can identify that hold value for you. And we're going to talk much, much more. So even if down the road you want to add something, I'll start reading them, and we'll have Q&A at the end, and we can really discuss this piece. So we'll put a little pin in it, if you will. Okay. So next slide here is the idea of ikigai. So I'm going to introduce this concept to you. And ikigai, quite literally, means reason to live. So this is a Japanese word, and it kind of gives the idea of your ikigai is what brings you pleasure, right? And that same idea of what brings you meaning. And in the work, it was Awakening Your Ikigai by Ken Moji. He told a story about Hiro Ono. And if you might have seen the documentary Hiro Dreams of Sushi, it is about a gentleman who owns a sushi restaurant in Tokyo, in a subway. I think he's the oldest living 3 Michelin star chef. I mean, many, many accolades. And this gentleman was chosen when President Obama, then President Obama, went to visit Tokyo, and they wanted to take him out for a nice meal. So they went to Hiro's restaurant. And so if you can imagine something like you are of an esteemed restaurant, and your country is choosing your restaurant to bring a president from another country to eat your food because they feel like it's the best, right? That's going to be a huge source of ikigai. That is going to be very meaningful, right? But the idea here is that it doesn't have to be those large, large moments. It doesn't have to be just those huge accomplishments or milestones, and they fit wonderfully too. But what about the small stuff? And I think, especially today and in the conversation that we'll have together, it's recognizing the small stuff and how that can give us some of that warmth and meaning. So one of my favorite examples here is even the cup of coffee in the morning, right? So for me, and I have some hot tea with me today, and I'll even show you, like, sometimes it's the comfort of holding the cup of coffee or the cup of tea, or the ritual of giving yourself a moment to kind of just take in the morning or the midday, or whatever you kind of designate for yourself, right? That's that idea of self-care. Other items are just feeling the sun on your skin and recognizing that as a source of meaning and just really that ikigai. And this can be different days, and it can be different for different people or different areas. I think somebody that lives by the beach, the smell of the salt air might be something. But what if we live in the city, and it's the sound of the city that can be like, let's close our eyes and find meaning in that. So if you kind of catch my drift here, there's a lot of sources, and I think it's how we choose to frame that incoming sensation, those sensories, that we can find some joy in those small things. Okay. So as we go into the talk today, and you saw with my little kind of makeshift table of contents that we're going to be talking about joy and a lot of positivity, right, and happiness. But I put this slide in here to show you that that's not all that we're able to feel, right? So all emotions are valid. So we don't need to try to be happy. We don't need to try to put a mask on. It's not that. This talk is not about that. It's about feeling our feelings. What we're going to talk about today is kind of how we can start to feel more of that joy and that purpose. But this is to let you know that all feelings are valid, and depending on what size screen you're watching this on, you might not even be able to see. I can barely read this little feelings wheel myself, but if you want to look one up, you could even just Google feelings wheel, and you'll find many, many different images. This one was off calm.com, which is a wonderful meditation site. They have an app. I highly recommend this or many other different sources for different mindfulness MP3s. But this was created by Dr. Gloria Wilcox. And if you look at this wheel, the center of the chart has happy and sad and surprised and angry. And then each of those concentric circles goes into more detail of those different emotions. But it gives you the idea that there is a large breadth and depth of feelings that we can have, and they are all valid. Okay. So as I go on, just remember that. Okay. So this here, I want to kind of talk a little bit about the work of Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich Nhat Hanh is just a very quick overview. I'm not going to give him any justice, but he is a Zen master. He actually was exiled from Vietnam in the 70s because he was calling for peace. And he relocated to Paris. He has a Plum Village Meditation Institute, but very much a teacher of mindfulness. He's a spiritual leader. So in his work here, and I'm just picking one of his many books, if you look up Thich Nhat Hanh, you'll see that he has quite a library of amazing work. But this one is just on the art of communication, and I have it here. I think I might even pull a little excerpt out. But he shares the idea of suffering bringing happiness. So what does that mean? So out of the book, when we understand suffering, we understand happiness. If we know how to handle suffering, we will know how to handle happiness and produce happiness. So if we break that down, the idea that if we're not happy all the time and we have other emotions that are more in that suffering end, or even if we're looking at a continuum, it's not so close to happiness, it makes us really recognize when we are happy, right? So it's kind of looking at that balance idea again. So understanding that suffering helps us understand and actually recognize methods to be happy, being happy. Okay. So let's see, I have the next page here. Okay, so another area here is we should all learn to embrace our own suffering, to listen to it deeply, and to have a deep look into its nature. And in doing so, we allow the energy of love and compassion to be born. We suffer less. We have compassion for ourselves, and we can more easily understand the suffering of another person and of the world. So just to slow down there for a minute, the idea that we have energy and love that'll help us suffer less, right? By really looking at our suffering. So, what's causing us to suffer can help us identify what can also cause us to be compassionate to ourselves and potentially compassionate to others. Okay, so we'll think about that piece. Okay. So, this next piece here, we're going to dip our toe into a little bit of a different idea. And we kind of we're setting the pathway towards finding meaning. But this is, if you see on the right, the hierarchy of needs. So you may have heard of Abraham Maslow. So he put together these needs, starting with the physiological needs. We need food, we need adequate sleep, and then going up, we need to feel safe, all the way to the idea of self-actualization. And to just give you a little background, actually, Dr. Maslow did not put this in a hierarchy. This came later, but we do like this triangle. So if we're looking at this triangle, right, and we're saying, okay, so we're meeting these needs, and we get to this idea of self-fulfillment and self-actualization. And that that's the whole person, right? But there could also be fluidity. It doesn't mean we're going to stay in one area. It doesn't mean that once we reach the top, we are continuously going to stay in that self-actualization component, but it does give us a foundation. And the reason I wanted to share this is that I attended a talk actually this summer. It was Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, and I'll talk a little bit about his work. And I'll sidebar for a minute here to just say that one thing that I'm recognizing that's coming out of this isolation and having this pandemic really change the way we do things and the way that we live is these other little elements that might not have been in our purview before. I'm going to a lot more talks. I hope you're attending this conference and enjoying what you're seeing in this conference. I think we're connecting in different ways. And I just felt that was something worth noting right now as I kind of explore a little bit of what I learned from Dr. Kaufman. But maybe you can all take this and share this with someone else. So with Dr. Kaufman, he put this idea of the sailboat, if you can see the image, put this sailboat together kind of as a next iteration from Abraham Maslow's hierarchy. And if you see, there's a lot of similarity. So in the boat area, there's the safety and the connection and the self-esteem. And then there's a sail, and that's exploration and love and purpose. So ultimately, the security is that boat. And if you open your sails, that's the growth. Now, probably intended, but I just noted that it's such a great image, I think, for what we go through as we kind of fluctuate across these different areas, from safety and connection to our basic needs to feeling more self-fulfilled and self-actualized and finding purpose, that it's really dependent on the ocean, right? So what are our circumstances? And sometimes there's rough seas and sometimes there's calm waters. So that is going to be how maybe there's that fluidity will exist. We're not always going to stay at that purposeful place, right? We're going to have to respond to our other needs. And I know that was an intention here, but it's just, I think, a wonderful analogy. So to give a little more idea of this transcend concept, Dr. Kaufman really did go into that idea of self-actualization as living fully human. And Deidre shared that, so I am the Chief Clinical Officer at the Cancer Support Community in Los Angeles. And we are a nonprofit that offers free support, mostly group support, individual counseling, education, healthy lifestyle classes, social events to those that are impacted by cancer. So somebody that's living with cancer, their loved ones, their caregivers. We do this because it is a supplement. This is what we recognize as psychosocial oncology, meaning that there is medical treatment, right? And we can heal our bodies, we can receive treatment, we can decrease tumor sizes, we can decrease pain levels, we can really address that physical component. But what about the rest of us, right? So that psychosocial, which really is social and emotional, is this other area, right? So if we're living fully human, we have that physical, yet we have that mind, body, and spirit as well. And that's kind of what we can look at here. So Dr. Kaufman shares that under favorable conditions, the satisfaction of these needs helps us move towards greater health, wholeness, and transcendence. Under unfavorable conditions, we become preoccupied with safety and security and neglect our possibilities for growth. Maybe it's not true neglect. Maybe there's things that happen in our lives or diagnoses that we receive that make some change towards where our needs are and what we're able to handle. In my past work with pediatric cancer and families that had a child with a diagnosis, the plate can get really full, right? Sometimes the needs are met, sometimes it's not. Sometimes, in my dissertation, actually, I did work with siblings of pediatric cancer patients, and it was remarkable to see the amount of people that were interested in having their siblings participate when the patient was not on active treatment, yet that was one of the determining factors to participate because the plate was less full. So sometimes, again, these situations are determined for us, but that will show where are we in that growth stage, are we in the security stage, and where we can fluidly move from between the two. So another area here is that growth can build on the fundamental need for exploration to reach higher levels of integration within oneself and to contribute something meaningful to the world. So this was a lot of information thrown at you, and I know we're going to have Q&A at the end. So again, we'll sit with this one for just a second. You might see that we're leaning towards that meaningful piece. So what does that mean? And it definitely kind of lives in that growth component. So it's when we kind of open our sails. Let's see what that means for us. Okay. So the concept now to share is really talking about meaning and cancer and how we can live with meaning. And I'm going to quote Friedrich Nietzsche, and this is kind of actually how I was introduced to the idea of meaning and finding meaning, as well as meaning-centered psychotherapy, which I'll tell you a little bit about. And this was the idea that he who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. And I'll say this again. So he who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. Meaning, and if I had you all here, I would ask you what this means to you, but I will take a stab at it myself. So it's really, what is that purpose and meaning that's driving you to live? What is the why? And then you can get through the other stuff, the how, right? Because you found something that you're connected with. And this applies at any time, even at end of life, even at in new beginnings, it can apply. And we'll tell you a little bit of how. So the next few slides and where we're going to go for the final portion of this talk is to really look at the idea of meaning-centered psychotherapy. And meaning-centered psychotherapy, or MCP, came from the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. It's the work of Dr. William Breitbart and Shannon Polito. And the idea is that finding a sense of purpose and meaning can create the distress in life, right? So we've kind of already identified a little bit of what we value on that the first couple slides. So now we're going to see what is that why? What is your value and what is your why? Okay. So bear with me with this one. This is a long quote, but I think it's very meaningful. No pun intended. And I want to share it with you. So the basis to the meaning-centered psychotherapy is all from the work of Viktor Frankl and his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl wrote this basically in his head and his mind while he was in a concentration camp. And he did not know what his fate was going to be. His family was killed in the concentration camp. He was a psychiatrist by training before going into the concentration camp, and he put to pen what he learned about himself through this experience when he was able to get out of the concentration camp. And in this book, he shares, we must never forget that we may find meaning in life even when confronted with a hopeless situation, when facing a fate that cannot be changed. For what then matters is to bear witness to the uniquely human potential at its best, which is to transform a personal tragedy into a triumph, to turn one's predicament into a human achievement. When we are no longer able to change a situation, such as inoperable cancer, we are challenged to change ourselves. So in these times now, understanding that there's this thinking from Viktor Frankl and how he applied it to cancer and meaning. But we have a lot happening right now all around us globally and in our country. There's isolation, there's unrest, we have a lot of uncertainty, we have an election coming, we have a lot of things that are changing and shifting rapidly, right? So how can we also apply that to finding meaning? It's almost like when we're not grounded, how can we find some purpose even without being grounded? And here as well, looking at the idea of the pandemic and disruptions to our routines and restrictions that are out of our control. We can't change that situation possibly, but we are challenged to change ourselves. Okay. So within the teachings of meaning-centered psychotherapy, and they apply this, it's a manualized therapy that can be applied to in a group setting or to individuals, but it also has just a lot of wonderful ideas that can be applied to life in general. And they've identified 4 different sources of meaning, and I'd like to review those with you because I think they're really powerful. And it starts with historical sources and attitudinal, creative, and experiential. And we'll go a little into depth on each of those. Okay. So, historical sources of meaning, which is kind of the life as a living legacy, right? So, we have our past and we have our present, what we're currently going through. We have the idea of our future, right? We do have some control of what we want that future to look like. And very purposefully, and this is something that stood out to me from the very beginnings of researching and learning about meaning-centered psychotherapy, is the active statement that they use, that legacy that will be given. So how will you give your legacy? Not leave your legacy, which is passive, right? And it doesn't sound as if it's in your control, but what do we have in our power as we identify our own purpose and meaning? And how do we want that to continue on? And so that's the legacy that we give. So in finding our meaning and where we get these sources of our own meaning, it can be relations and history and experiences that we had all the way up to today, and including how we see ourselves living out our future and what that means even when we're gone. Attitudinal sources of meaning can be really looking at our limitations, right? When we come across a roadblock or a challenge, it's how we acknowledge and move through those challenges, right? So this comes also to where Viktor Frankl was talking about turning personal tragedy into triumph, right? The idea of pain versus suffering can come in here. And again, it doesn't have to be all positive. I've done some wonderful activities within this where looking at what brings you purpose, it might not be all just joyful moments, but maybe there's some really meaningful moments that were a little bit hard, but they created the person that you are today. So each of those things, and in here with the attitude also, it's looking at how did we overcome situations that might have been aversive? What was our reaction? What do we have control over in those situations? And that's how we have an attitude towards those situations. So that can be a source of meaning. Creative sources is just engaging. So there's musicians, there's artists, there's writers, there's creative thinkers, all of these things. Who are we in the world? Are we teachers? Right? What are our responsibilities? Have we identified someone to mentor us, and are we a mentor to someone else? So it can be all of these accomplishments. These can be some of those milestones. We can even look back probably to that concept of ikigai, and those little items and some of those great items, right? Those can be creative. Hiro Ono, that we spoke about, probably made some of the best sushi and still continues to make the best sushi in the world. So that's pretty creative. So that's a wonderful way to look at the creative source. And then experiential sources, this is who we and how we connect. So it can be individuals that we know in our lives, our friends, our family, our teachers, our role models, like I said earlier. Who do we have these relationships with, and how have those relationships shaped who we are today? And how do we want to build relationships to shape, ourselves in the future as well as our legacy in the future? So it just gives us a lot of control. The other piece here, which is one of my favorites, is just how we engage in nature. Imagine yourself taking a walk, and you can see yourself. Are you walking along the beach? Are you walking along a wonderful path in the forest? Are you walking along, are you keen to visit the desert? So this is the nature piece. And that can be fulfilling, right? I can be fulfilled sometimes just looking out the window or going sitting on my porch sometimes, right? It's just sometimes it's taking a minute of free time for ourselves and having that experience, using all of our senses and taking in the world around us. So these can be experiential sources of meaning. So I encourage you to think about what's meaningful to you. We've looked at our values and we've gone through that little trajectory. And this is all just very kind of simple groundwork to how you can find meaning for yourselves, how you can leave here today and maybe identify a little bit day by day, or maybe you want to get more into this practice and look more into mindfulness and self-care and items that can help you really connect with that meaning. Okay. So before we end today, I do want to go over just some little tools. I always like the concept of the tool belt, our imaginary tool belt, right? So when we come into a situation where we might need to help ourselves a little bit, we might be, it could be anything. It could be an upcoming scan that we want to relax a little bit for. It could be sometimes it's difficult to fall asleep at night. Sometimes we just need a tool to get a little more grounded and a little more centered. That can also bring us that purpose and meaning when we just kind of are able to slow down a little bit. So I'm going to go over a couple of these with you and also tell you where you can find some more information. So the first is the idea of diaphragmatic breathing. You might have heard of this. The diaphragm here is kind of what kind of splits like your belly area and your chest area. And when you breathe deeply, it's your diaphragm is expanding. You can feel the movement there. So diaphragmatic breathing, and if you're in a safe place where you can test this out and you can ground yourself, put your feet on the ground and just kind of put one hand on your belly. Can't see mine, but I'm also going to put one hand up on my chest. So I'm going to take a deep breath, and when you're breathing deeply and you're actually participating in that diaphragmatic breathing, your hand on your belly is going to be the one that kind of comes out, right? So let's take a deep breath with me. You can even breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth or out through your nose. Just take a deep breath and feel your belly expand. And feel your body just inhale that breath and then take an exhale and feel that release. So you'll see it kind of coming with your hand. The hand that's down on your belly is going to come in and out. So we can try again. So sometimes just a deep breath, or maybe a series of deep breaths, is enough to kind of get your endorphins going. It helps to release dopamine, which can help with mood. It helps center you. It can slow you down a little bit, especially if you're feeling like you're racing, or if things are getting rapid. Or even if you're in the world of Zoom and you're going from meeting to meeting, and it's just very, quick paced. Take a minute, even just a minute, to do this can, I think, really give you a great reward. Another quick tool on diaphragmatic breathing, which I like, which is, this works really well with kids, but I liked it a lot, so I think it works well with adults too. If you give yourself a hug, you're actually kind of causing that whole top part of your body to kind of be a little more rigid and structured so it can't expand. So if you take a deep breath in when you're giving yourself a hug, you're kind of automatically doing that belly breathing. So that's a little trick. And that's one too, if you do have children and you want to kind of go do a breathing exercise with them, you can give yourself a hug and take in a deep breath. Okay. 4-7-8 breathing is another one that can be useful. And the 4-7-8 are just counts. So the idea is that you take a deep breath in for 4 counts, and then you hold it for 7 counts, and then you exhale slowly for 8 counts. And we can do that together, and then I'll give you another little trick for that one too. But if you're going to breathe in deeply, just in through your nose, and then just hold it, and slowly exhale through your mouth. So sometimes that exhale in and of itself is what's really going to cause react with that relaxation. And I will tell you, if you have anything that kind of makes breathing a little bit more of a source of anxiety, if you have like lung cancer, or if any of the side effects have to do with your breathing or tightness in the chest, maybe don't do the breathing as a way to relax. And even in some of the meditations and guided imagery, when they focus on breath, you can focus on something else. Focus on, your heart rate, or focus on something else that's in the room. So, but these are good ways. And when I do the 4-7-8 breathing, I think sometimes incorporating, and I'm going to talk about guided imagery in a minute, but sometimes incorporating imagery with the breathing can be very useful. So when I take a deep breath in, I like to just see the air kind of filling my body, and almost envisioning myself kind of bringing in this fresh air that's clean and healthy, and kind of a just great source of life, and kind of having that float around me for those 7 counts. And then when I exhale, it's letting go of the negative feelings, letting go of stress. I can feel my muscles relax. Even depending on if you incorporate that imagery, letting go of illness or sickness, and just getting a visual, because sometimes that in and of itself can be very supportive. So this is just a tool. And I think there are even apps. If you put 4-7-8 breathing into your app store, I'm sure that there's apps that can help you do these breathing techniques. You can do this on your own, just like we did. It's very easy to kind of incorporate. And then guided imagery. So the idea of guided imagery is kind of that same thought that I kind of shared at the beginning. Like, if we kind of ground our feet and get comfortable, most like we were going to meditate. Oftentimes you can close your eyes. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, kind of just having your gaze go down your nose, so you're not having a lot of visual stimulation. And what guided imagery does is it can kind of walk you through a mental picture. So I've utilized guided imagery to, again, I'll bring the beach idea up. It's an easy one. And living out here in Southern California, I think we can kind of have a visual of the beach, but not just looking at what the beach looks like, but incorporate your senses. So what are you smelling? Taking a deep breath in and smelling the salty air, feeling the sand in your toes as you imagine this place. What do you hear? Do you hear the waves? And this can be done for anybody. I've done this with large groups where If we had the time today, we could have done something where it's imagining a place that you just feel very comfortable and safe. It can be a place you've been to, a place that you, really recognize as a home. And what are your senses there? And that is an element to get kind of grounded in those moments. And you can use this as a tool of your own anytime. It's really, I think, just useful. And it also demonstrates the control that you have over your mind, and I think it's just a really useful way to kind of get connected with that feeling of yourself and slow down when things kind of start to get rapid, right? Okay. So the last little quote that I'd like to share here, it's Viktor Frankl again, and but if there is meaning, and it is unconditional meaning, and neither suffering nor dying can detract from it. I'll read it again. But if there is meaning, it is unconditional meaning, and neither suffering nor dying can detract from it. Right? But we can't lose that meaning. That's ours. We won't be detracted. So this is just a list. I went over a lot of different books and shared some different thoughts and quotes. And so I wanted to make sure that I shared all of this with you. I got some great photos. So again, we're a nonprofit, and Pexels was wonderful. They have wonderful photos, and it's a nonprofit stock photography. So I'll share all of this with you. And that is the end of the presentation component. And we are welcome to have you share your questions.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for your insightful and knowledgeable presentation about resilience. We're going to go ahead and get started with that Q&A, and please feel free to drop those right in the chat, and we're going to get Shannon to answer your questions. And right off the bat, Shannon, we've got a question about what it looks like to create a daily practice, or what can one person do on a daily basis to find that inner strength or to tap into that inner strength?
So there's a lot of different ways that you can incorporate mindfulness or meditation into daily practice. And I think sometimes it's being like less like restrictive on ourselves or judgmental of ourselves. Sometimes it's as simple as like, do you just take a minute? Like I was mentioning the cup of coffee. So sometimes it's harder for me to actually sit down and practice. Like you might have visions of somebody sitting with their legs crossed and really meditating, right? That's wonderful. But sometimes that's not as easy to do. So there's ways to incorporate that. There's books that you can find on really how to incorporate a practice of mindfulness. There, again, recognizing how many different conferences and educational talks are out there and what's being shared. There's many things on the internet that have those guided imagery. I did forget to mention that UCLA has the Mindfulness Awareness Research Center, MARC, MARC is their department. They have free downloadable MP3s for imagery and meditation, so you can incorporate that. But sometimes it's as simple as giving yourself a moment and see if that moment can grow to 2 minutes, and see if that can grow to 10 minutes, and see if you can allow yourself to kind of put yourself and your needs at the forefront, and take away those distractions. A simple thing that I did, and it might sound crazy or it might sound easy, somewhere along the line in the last few months, I realized I was waking up with my phone and reading emails at 6 a.m. or watching whatever news was alerting me, and I took my notifications off. So my phone doesn't tell me when to pick up the phone. I felt, for me, it was wonderful. I have a lot less distraction, and I'm okay with that. So that in and of itself, maybe that wasn't an answer to your question about how do I find mindfulness practice, but it did help me reduce some of those distractions and help me center a little bit on, like, it's okay to have a quiet moment.
I feel like when we do, I think sometimes people think it has to be this certain picture, like you said, but these little simple things, once we connect to ourselves, can also help us to be able to connect to that inner strength, even in times where we can't be like 100% still, right? Maybe you're sitting in traffic, which there's not that much right now, but, or maybe in that everlasting Zoom meeting, or somebody's receiving treatment, when a time isn't a time where maybe ideally somebody think, well, I don't have all the quiet in the world, I don't have all the time in the world. it can still connect just because of these tiny little things that we might incorporate during our day. That's so powerful. Thank you for that, Jen.
Yeah.
So next up on our list is like, are there any tips for keeping ourselves focused on the present moment and not on the past and probably not even in the future? What are some things that we can do to stay like right here, right now?
Absolutely. And these are questions that, I pose to myself too. So we're not alone in thinking, oh gosh, how do I do that? For sure. And something that I'll add is the idea of practice makes progress. I don't think even shooting for perfect is where we need to be right now. So those little moments of progress. But in terms of like an objective answer to your question, I think there's an app for that. The idea, the concept of worry time. Like sometimes if we have a lot of worry, right, and it's consuming us and it's hard to sleep at night and it's all the time, setting like, okay, you know what, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 3:30, I'm going to dedicate that for me to worry. And that's where I can try to work out the things that are stressing me out. And then when clock hits 3:30, I'm going to move that aside. I'm going to take time for me. So sometimes it is allowing you to be more present in different moments, but it can also look the other side of it. It's like maybe it's containing that stuff that's, that we might be ruminating on, or we might be perseverating. It might be, there's days when we can't regulate that, but there are days and tricks that we can when our minds start to kind of get away from us. So the deep breath, I think, to really start to focus and ground, small steps to integrating some of these more like meaning centered mindful meditation techniques, and then possibly designating time to worry and then saying, okay, I've done that for today, I'm going to free my mind. And there literally is an app for that. I think it's called Worry Time, blue and yellow. I think it was put out from a university. So as I'm telling you that I'm trying to stay away from my phone, of course there's apps for this.
Well, I mean, I think that it goes back to being mindful, right? I mean, our phones can be great time wasters, and they can also be great tools to help us kind of achieve the life that we want, sort of, if we want to be smart about it with like our smartphones. But I think that's so awesome that there is an app that, and even that practice, I've never even considered that before, creating space for that. I think so much of our lives we're told to like, well, just shove it, put it away, or just let's not talk about it, or la 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 la. If I don't think about it, it's not going to happen. But of course, that can show up in our bodies in other ways, and it can leak out. It's not going to not be there, right? So thank you for that. That's an interesting tip. I can't wait to incorporate that myself. That's really cool.
Well, and to follow up quickly too, we've done a little bit more one-on-one with like children. And sometimes the little kiddos that have that same, like, I'm not going to talk about my worry, or I don't want my mom or dad to know that I worry, or, they don't feel safe even talking about something that's stressful for them. We've incorporated the idea of worry boxes and writing down a little concern or a worry and putting it in a little box or putting it away. And then also talking about, do you feel comfortable maybe showing mom that worry? And maybe you can have a conversation about that. So it's just another kind of tool.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. So, what are some tips on how to manage some of our impulsive thoughts? Well, you did talk about the constant worry and the anxiety. And so, like, let's say, maybe somebody is experiencing something that they're having a hard time just relegating their worries to that one worry time that they might have per day. What happens like when like things just pop into our mind, or maybe we make free associations? What else can we do to kind of manage that?
Mm-hmm. It's such a good question. And I think it's so kind of individualized. And what I share, I think maybe can help you identify what would work for you. Sometimes when we're having a better day, when we're not in the midst of those concerns and that thinking pattern, we can recognize what really does help ground us. Is it, when I am able to have some chamomile tea, I feel more centered? Or is it, if I step away from whatever situation for a little bit, or I allow some fresh air, that's when I feel that that's my tool. So sometimes it's each of us identifying our own tools and methods. And so when we have those moments, we can recognize what might help us, because what works for me might not work for you. and vice versa. But how can we start thinking in that way that we do have control that we might not recognize, especially when we're in those moments?
Yes.
So seeing what works in other ways might help. You know, some person might be able to go sit and read, and that can absolutely transport them into another area. Someone else might not be able to read the pages when they're in that moment. So something else would be of benefit. Someone might be really um, benefited by music. Sometimes I'll put my, I don't think I go anywhere now without these, which is odd because I never wore them before COVID, but I'm on so many Zoom calls. But sometimes I'll put, instead of music, I'll just put sleep meditation on, even in the middle of the day. And it's just this kind of nice, calming background sound. And that can help me move through what I need to move through in my day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yes, I love that daily thing. I have to try that thing with the sleep meditation during the day, and hopefully not fall asleep. But
Don't fall asleep.
yeah, got work
That's
to
when you're
do.
going. Sometimes I'm like, bring it down a notch.
Absolutely. So one of our questions from our audience is, how can someone who suffers from anxiety calm themselves enough to start a practice? It kind of goes back to like sort of like we were talking about that worry question, like how do we rein it in just enough to begin?
hmm Um, so I sometimes have thoughts about that too, like, okay, practice. And sometimes the idea of practice can be daunting, right? Because so we're already setting up that we're not even ready, and there's this practice that we need to get to. So sometimes just the idea of how do I calm myself, right? That's practice enough. So I would say that even the awareness that you are feeling anxious and you are starting to kind of, the awareness is there, you want to center yourself and begin to calm yourself, you're already in the midst of that practice. So if you are able to find a quiet place to sit or wherever you feel comfortable, you're able to incorporate some of that breathing. I would say along that practice is progress. You're making those steps. So and also, I mean, if we're watching, you know, news or you know, and don't tell my mindfulness friends that are wonderful at this practice, but there's that goal to get to there where we incorporate it, where you know, we spend an hour a day being mindful. That's lovely, but sometimes reducing that um kind of challenge and that goal to something more tangible, like what can I do today? And your question in and of itself shows that you're ready to calm yourself, right? And that can be enough for that day. And then the next day there can be maybe a little bit more, or maybe that's enough that day too.
So the comments are coming and it says, thank you for the good information and the tips to get us going in our own journeys towards finding our purpose and joy. It is, I mean, it's absolutely necessary. And I feel like sometimes we don't have good models of this, maybe just because of the world we live in, or we create like a faux recipe for what we think it should be, maybe based on what we see on social media or what we're observing in other people, but we don't really understand how to put these pieces together for ourselves. So I really, really want to thank you for that on behalf of some of our members who are watching. But another question that I have for you is, you mentioned a little bit of something like to help our children manage their worries. What might be some other things we can do to incorporate mindfulness in for our children? I know that them observing us is definitely one thing, but is there something, some practical tools or tips as we try to help our children cope as well?
Yeah. So a little of what we shared, I like the hug, right? So maybe even just some education about what it's like to slow down and to be mindful. Um, One of my favorite things that I think was my first introduction to mindfulness, and you may have tried this before, but it's eating mindfully. And there is a you could probably use anything, but we had a raisin. So imagine having one raisin and eating it. I've with kids, we've done chocolate chips, and that's probably better than a raisin, but you can use raisins.
That's what
So,
incentive.
so if you take that raisin and you close your eyes and you pull your senses in, and you're concentrating just on that raisin, can you feel the texture of the raisin? Like, don't just gobble it down. So kind of sit with it for a minute. Can you feel the texture of the raisin? The raisin. What does a raisin taste like? So I think typically a raisin or something small like that, we just eat, right? Maybe mindlessly, where we're just eating it. And we might not actually be able to say all the little nuances of the flavor of a raisin. So that's a fun one to do with kiddos, where you can take a minute and say, like, let's try this raisin together. And what does it taste like? What senses are being, can you smell it? Does it smell like anything before you put it in your mouth? When you chew it, what's the consistency? So pull all that in and mindfully eat a raisin. And that can be a neat little way to kind of introduce the concept of mindfulness. And then, yes, how we kind of model our behaviors, and giving yourself a moment to sit and center can also be a great model to a child. But these activities, breathing, I think it's kind of that explanation of like how and when to take a deep breath. With kids, a lot of times there's a lot of research out on like flipping, like if they flip their lid. And I think there's even like a really cool model, like if this is your brain, but you get kind of out of control, you flip your lid. So how do you bring back that center to where your emotional, like that fight or flight reaction is going, maybe without control? So the idea of when a child is getting really anxious or reactions are coming out and behaviors are starting to come out, maybe that's when they can learn to, like, let's take a deep breath together, right? Even before responding to the behavior, like maybe that can be something to model and to educate on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. Oh, another one of our questions from a participant is, did you speak about pain versus suffering? She came in a little bit late, or this person came in a little bit late. And can you give us maybe a brief overview, like the difference between pain and suffering?
Yes. So there's some ideas out there that the idea of pain and suffering is kind of, pain sometimes unavoidable, right? We have physical pain, we have emotional pain, and that's legitimate, a painful experience. It can be the feeling of anxiety, right? It can be the feeling of discomfort. It can be grief and loss, right? There's pain. And the suffering sometimes is more of a response that we might have more control over than we recognize. I've seen in some lectures, and if you put pain versus suffering probably into a Google search, you're going to see images of pain is unavoidable and suffering is optional. I see the idea there. I think it takes a lot to really recognize when suffering is optional, but I think that is that kind of that self-actualization and really getting into meaning and the tragedy to triumph. I mean, it really kind of pulls in all those layers when we're responding to what's painful, because it's true, real pain that we're experiencing. But sometimes if we get into like negative thought patterns, maybe the suffering is, I'll never feel better again, or I brought this on myself. Or maybe there's these really dark thoughts that we have that we keep kind of circulating in our mind, and that's the suffering. So finding a way to recognize the pain, but without those thoughts that might not be like legitimate, right? That's kind of where our thought distortions come in. Finding a way to reduce those thoughts can reduce that suffering and that's where that pain versus suffering idea can come in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. We just have a few more minutes left, and I really love that recap of pain versus suffering and how that can show up in how we choose to think about and approach it with our minds. And like we do have a lot of people feel like it's out of their control, like you said before, and just being able to maybe reclaim a little bit of our power. That is such it's such an empowering tool and an empowering idea. So I really hope that our viewers and our participants can kind of fall into that and feel into that a little bit. Yeah. Just one last question, and that is the words just kind of flew out of my head just a little bit. But the question is more around what is something like maybe some really practical tools as people maybe even approach their treatment. or even approaching like understanding their diagnosis, what are some things, some practical maybe in the office things or just before, to kind of, we talked a little bit about the hugging. We talked about, some of these ideas of just kind of calming our mind and noticing the things around us. But any last tips or tools for like in the moment ways to manage, specifically like around approaching something new of like understanding your diagnosis or approaching your treatment plan.
Yes. So I'm sure there's many things that we didn't talk about today that would be great tools. I think just the idea of opening your mind and that empowerment component, Deidre, that you talked about, of where you have that power and where you have that control and how you can control your mind. When I very first started practicing guided imagery, it was when I was working with pediatric clients, and I had a teenager that was going in for a lumbar puncture, which they're painful. And there's a lot of anxiety that comes up before a medical treatment like that, and like many other medical treatments. And so that's where we started to really incorporate that guided imagery, and he felt comfortable using that, like having that, like, okay, when I go, I already know what I want to use as my tool and to support myself and what I have control over. So some of it was just leading up to that. And then he was able to soothe himself a little before the procedure. So there's many things that we didn't talk about today. These are just a few, but as you get into maybe the literature of uh, mindfulness, meditations, guided imagery, all in those realms, there's some great activities.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Shannon. I love that idea of making a plan, even for that, before you go in, not just being, okay, I'm going to brace myself for whatever's to come, but I'm going to really take care of myself in the way that I can while I allow my providers to help take care of me as well. It's very powerful. Thank you. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of this incredible information, Shannon. And thank you so much to our audience for joining us as well. We really encourage you to check out our on-demand sessions. We have authors' corners, research, and survivor testimonials via the links above. This talk that we've just finished will be added on our on-demand section as well, so you can watch it again or even share it with your friends and loved ones. The registration will continue to be open until Saturday morning, so be sure to share this virtual conference with others. If you want to know more about the Pink Ribbon Place and our no-cost services, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the Pink Ribbon Place, or visit our website at pink.rchf.org. At the end of the conference, watch out for a survey where you can let us know how we did and have the opportunity to win some of our fabulous prizes. Our next live session is coming up just shortly. It's called Let's Talk About Sex, Intimacy, and Sexual Health After Cancer, which will be available to watch live today at 4:30 with me. To watch and talk about, to see what's coming next, please visit our schedule at the link above. And again, a heartfelt thanks to everyone for joining us. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you, Deidre.
Thank you so much, Shannon.